Alright, earlier in the show we learned how to make some games, but now let's look at what it takes to run a game development studio with Game Dev Tycoon.
Your goal is to build your very own game studio from scratch. You start as a lone programmer, making games in your garage near the start of the games industry in the early 1980s. You guide your company through the history of video games and turn it into a thriving, fully-fledged game development studio. It's very reminiscent of the addictive mobile game Game Dev Story.
Yes, it certainly takes a lot of ideas from that. In fact, even the name is quite similar. As a developer, your main goal is to create great games. But before you start, you have to choose a topic, pick a genre, which system you're making it for, and finally, what engine you'd like to develop on. And then you sit back and watch as your little developer pops off bubbles of development.
Affirmative. This game is full of little choices. Each game has multiple stages of development where you decide how much time you devote to various elements. Do you focus on story or gameplay, graphics or audio? Or do you focus on everything evenly?
Yeah, Darren, I found you really had to make a call and focus on what suits the game. Spending your time evenly on everything seems to make for a fairly average game. But if you're making an RPG, then focusing on storyline and dialogue might just be what you need to get those elusive 9s and 10s from the reviewers.
Waiting for those review scores is always tense, and it's a nice victory when you do get high scores. However, while I found that focusing on certain aspects could help, it was almost impossible to know how good my game would be. Sometimes I invested millions of dollars into my game and made what felt like the right choices, only to find it would bomb with low review scores.
Yeah, it often feels like just dumb luck, and the reviewers don't give you much feedback to go on. Would have been great if there was some sort of focus group testing thing that you could do so you could see if your game is on the right track, especially since a few dud games can ruin you early on.
Well, once a game has completed development, you do need to spend time to squash any bugs, and you can earn a few more points of development polish by holding back your game, but it's still impossible to know if it'll turn out okay.
Once you've had a few big hits, it's time to move into an office and grow your studio, which means hiring staff.
When making bigger games, you have to make even more choices, as now you'll need to assign individual developers to each aspect of the game, while making sure you don't give any one of your developers too much work to handle.
So there's quite a lot to think about, which I like, and I also like all the gaming culture references, such as G3, which is obviously E3, and Vonnie, which is obviously Sony.
Affirmative. It's actually almost a complete alternate history of the video games industry, so it can be quite helpful to have a bit of knowledge about big moments in the industry's history. For example, if you're aware of the fate of the failed Dreamcast console, then you'll do well to avoid making any games for it.
And I was honoured to even find a reference to myself and Hex in the game. Overall, though, I did find myself growing a bit tired of this game rather quickly, so I'm giving it 5 out of 10 rubber chickens.
Affirmative. I'm giving it 5 as well.